Hello, welcome to the EPG Pathshala program in Linguistics. I am Professor Ravinder Gargesh from the Department of Linguistics, University of Delhi. The fifth module on linguistic stylistics is on style features, and we will focus on some style features which are phonological in nature. So we will focus on features of sound, that is the level of phonology, style features level of phonology. And within this, we will focus on rhythm, rhyme scheme, a word about stanza forms, onomatopoeia, alliteration, assonance, consonants. These would be the main things that we will talk about. And the main objective is to give you an idea about style features as they occur in texts, particularly poetry, because sound is important to poetry. And rhythm is very important for poetry. And we should know what rhythm is. Generally, rhythm is left out in analysis in classes. In many classes of literature, poetic rhythms are not taught. Because unless you bring linguistics into it, rhythms cannot be explained. And of course, we will explain other concepts also like rhyme, onomatopoeia, alliteration, assonance, these kind of figures. Study of literary style assumes that the elements of style perceived by readers are significant linguistic combinations. And these combinations operate covertly to generate artistic or aesthetic meanings. So there's a covert process going on. And these are you can call them devices. The Russian formalists call them devices. So did the Prague scholars call them devices. We could call them by whatever name, but these are the configurations that take place. They're important configurations, patterns which are identified, and they become stylistic because they lead to some sense. They convey sense. Now within this, we need to look at not only the style features but their interrelations. Now, how do we study a text? How do we study language? We study language by looking at its various levels of organization. We have the level of phonology, we have the level of lexicon, we have the level of syntax, we have the level of pragmatics, which will include semantics. So these are the kind of levels we break language into these subcomponents and study. So similar thing would be done, similar thing is needed when we study literature. We need to look at the structures in terms of sounds, in terms of words, vocabulary, which will include morphology, and in also syntax, and also the pragmatic or the semantic or the non-literal use of expressions. We will be doing that. And each sign is a kind of a play of signifier. Each sign generates sense. Each sign generates meaning. Each sign contributes to the context also. So this is very important. And within this, we are narrowing down to phonology. We're only going to focus on what kind of structures we find in phonology and how they have to be decoded and what kind of patterns are there. Of course, it is not possible to discuss all the patterns, but we will discuss major patterns which could give you an idea about how to go about and handle other patterns. So you need to have the ability to handle other patterns. So for that, we take these basic things, basic premises, basic constructs, and then how these are tackled, can lead you on to look at other facts. Now we know that phonology is a branch of linguistics and it identifies distinct sound groups and how these are put together to give meaning. How these phonetic elements of a language are grouped together and exploited by speakers to communicate their meaning. The phonological patterns not only draw in a text, the phonological patterns draw our attention. because they appear in a foregrounded manner. They're foregrounded, they draw our attention, they enhance communication, they generate rhythm, they generate patterns, which may be formal patterns, or sometime now currently the trend is to violate the patterns, maybe a new pattern, metrical patterns, link similar sounding words together, create rhyme, create alliteration, assonance, and all this phenomena. Repetition of sound is behind all these categories. Repetitions of various types. Some deviant forms, some more repetition, extra regularity. So extra regularity is also foregrounded because it is not used in ordinary language. The frequency is not that much. Here the frequency may be much more. Repetition may be much more. So these are the things that we will look at, but restrict ourselves to the system of sound or phonology. The most important is rhythm in poetry. What does rhythm depend on? Rhythm depends on a number of factors, mainly two. One, it depends upon the mathematical pattern of syllables. Mathematical pattern of syllables giving us meter, and meter giving us the rhythm. So we will look at some meters, we will look at what kind of rhythms are there. There's a metrical rhythm, there's a prose rhythm, prose-like rhythm. There is a rhythm, number one. Number two, rhythm depends upon performance. The reciter, the reader. Two readers may read it in a different way, and reading it differently will bring a different interpretation. That's why sounds are very important, because even putting a stress on a different syllable could lead the whole text in another direction. Let me give you one small example. This is a line from Julius Caesar. I hope you have all read this play. Anyway, but you just listen to the sounds, even if you have not read it. Mark Antony speaks this line. This line can be spoken, recited in two ways. The words are, I'll speak them without the stress patterns, and then with the stress. If you have tears, prepare to shed them now. This is the line. If you have tears, prepare to shed them now. How can this be read? Where is the stress? Here is one way. If you have tears, prepare to shed them now. If you have tears, prepare to shed them now. The stresses are clear. The stress was on you, on tears, on pair, on shed, and on now. Another reading is possible, which is a different reading. We stress not the you, but if we stress the conditional, if you have tears, prepare to shed them now. Now the stress goes to if, and then tears and pair and shed and now. So where is the focus? Is the focus on you? If the focus is on you, the evoked meaning is different. If the focus is on the conditional, then it leads to another sense. And in the context of other neighboring expressions, the meanings will gradually change. So how is the rhythm created? Rhythm gets created by, number one, the patterns of stresses, the meter, and second, the person who recites. So two different persons reciting could recite it in two different ways. And the two different ways would evoke two different significations. So this is very important. In number one, where the stress was on the second syllable and the fourth and the sixth and the eighth and the 10th, this pattern is close to folk singer pattern in English. Whereas the other one, to begin with the stress right at the beginning, is like ordinary speech. It's more closer to ordinary rhythm. But there's irregularity. We'll look at this in greater detail and in the discussion that follows. In the regularity, we have the traditional metrical rhythms. And in rhythms where this traditional element of meter is missing, it is prose-like. It's like ordinary speech. We call it prosrhythm. So poetry can have prosrhythm, poetry can have metrical, it could be a mixture. So much variety is possible. Now, how do we look at this rhythm? What are these patterns? We talk about meter. We talk about meter, chanda in the Indian tradition, meter. Now in the meter is a linguistic phenomena. Meter is a linguistic phenomena based on the principle of isochrony. Isochrony means equal timelessness, like drum beat, beating of drum at regular intervals. So similarly, the syllables stressed would be at regular intervals. Of course, I would like to just mention in passing that in English is a stress time language. So we take the stresses into account for the rhythm. Unlike Indian languages, which are syllable timed. Our languages are more syllable based. Our timing in poetry in Indian languages is dependent upon syllable weight. Whereas in English, the length of the syllable doesn't matter. It is the stresses, the domain within the stresses that's important. That is what makes it equal. So some meters may have a longer foot. We will talk about the foot also. And yet it has to be compressed to match the timing of the stress syllables. So rhythm is generated by an English language. So we'll concentrate on the English language for the time being. So meter is based on the principle of equal timedness, recurrence of stresses, isochrony. It is analogous to musical pulse or heartbeat. In poetry, these equivalences are rooted in line. What defines poetry from, let's say, novel or from another drama? It is the concept of the line. All poetry is composed in lines. Dramas can also be poetic. So we'll have lines in drama too, if they're poetic, like Shakespeare's plays. Otherwise, line defines a poem. And it is the line that is the conditioning factor of the rhythm. How should the line be structured? What should be the length of the line? How many syllables in a line? That would give us the meter. The number of syllables, their length, and the placement of stresses and relatively non-stresses. This will give us the meter. So the largest unit of the meter is line, and within the meter, within the line, the minimum unit of articulation is a syllable. So syllables in English, I said, are stressed, unstressed, but in Indian languages they are more, the timing is based upon syllable weight. Now these units, based on the principle of equivalence, that is syllables, how they are valued according to the stresses placed on the different syllables within the line, it generates a rhythm. In any poetic line, the number of syllables can be counted, and their organization into metrical units can be observed. So what is the recurrence? The recurrence will tell us what it is. The recurrence of the metrical units will result in verse, the rhythm of the verse. Since each language has its own process of recurrence, we just mentioned in passing, classical Greek, Latin, Indian languages, Poetry is organized into lines of long and short syllables. Chinese poetry is dependent on tones, but English poetry exploits stresses and relatively non-stressed syllables. Meter in English literary tradition is conventionalized type of stress patterns. A pattern of stressed and non-stressed syllables, let's not say non-stressed, relatively unstressed syllables in a poetic line. So what are the patterns of stresses and relative non-stresses? Although meter and stress are related, they are not the same. English meter has been viewed in terms of binary feature, stressed, unstressed. There are two, stressed, unstressed. Traditionally marked with a accent marker and the other marked with generally a cross, which means unstressed or relatively less stressed. You could also mark them with the SW, strong syllable, weak syllable. And in poetic works, the binary system of metrical combinations are highly controlled in sequences, in traditional poetry, very controlled, and are said to occur in feet. What is this feet? Feet is the combination of stressed and unstressed syllable or syllables. So one unit, one pattern identified is a foot. So there's one foot and it can have many feet. So it depends upon the number of feet occurring in the line. In ordinary language, these control of feet is missing. So we have a prose-like rhythm. Prose, we speak like ordinary speech is more prose. In prose rhythm, prosaic, it's more prosaic. But poetry is marked by metrical patterns, traditional poetry particularly. The most common types of metrical feet are iamb, trochee, anapest, and dactyl. Their organization patterns are, what is an iamb? Iamb, 2 feet, 1 foot, 2 syllables. First syllable is unstressed, second syllable is stressed. This pattern of relatively unstressed and stressed, this is iamb. The reverse one is trochee. The first syllable is stressed, the second one is relatively less stressed, the weaker one. So unstressed, stressed is iamb, stressed, unstressed is trochee, 2 syllables. Anapest and dactyl consist of 3 syllables. Anapest consists of unstressed syllable, and stressed syllable. Again, by unstressed I mean relatively less stressed. One is prominent, the other is not prominent. So the main accent falls on the third syllable. Unstressed, unstressed, stressed. This is the terminology they generally use in metrical analysis. Dactyl is the opposite of anapest. Stressed syllable, then unstressed and unstressed. So let us take these 4 as major categories of meter, and we can take some examples to show how it creates the rhythm in poetry. Here is an example from Shakespeare, from Milton. Listen to the stresses very carefully. And swims, or sinks, or wades, or flies. Again, and swims, iamb. Now iamb, as I said, is unstressed and stressed. See how the pattern occurs in this line from Paradise Lost by John Milton. Listen to the sounds carefully and the stresses. And swims, or sinks, or wades, or creeps, or flies. Again, and swims, or sinks, or wades, or creeps, or flies. Stress is on swims, sinks, wades, creeps, flies. And the non-stressed ones are and, or. The functional words are non-stressed, relatively less stressed. So the dominant pattern is unstressed, stressed, and swims, yum, or sinks, yum, or wades, yum, or creeps, yum, or flies, yum. So we have five feet, and all five are yums. And swims, or sinks, or wades, or creeps, or flies, all five are yums. How many feet are there? 5 pentameter. 5 means pentameter. Anyway, so but here the focus, we are not talking about pentameter, we are talking about yum. So yum is marked by unstressed, stress. And here we have and swims, or sinks, or wades, or creeps, or flies. The trochee is the opposite. Here we have the stress occurring at the beginning, and the non-stressed or relatively less stressed follows. Here's a line from Longfellow's poem, The Song of Hiawatha. And before the summer ended stood the maize in all its beauty. And other lines, the lines preceding it, tell us that the first syllable has to be stressed. So we stress the first one. And before the summer ended stood the maize in all its beauty. The focus is and, unstressed is B, trochee. Second one, before is broken into 2 syllables. For metrical feet, the word is not the unit. We look at only sounds. And B is 1 unit, for the is another unit. It's stressed and unstressed, stressed and unstressed. Summer, stressed, unstressed. Ended, stressed, unstressed. Stood the, stressed, unstressed. Maize, stressed, unstressed. All its stressed, unstressed. Beauty, beau, stressed, T, unstressed. So we have trochee, a meter which is trochaic. And the first one was a meter that was iambic. In Anapest, the 3-syllable meter, unstressed, unstressed, stressed. And for all this one little are to thank. Browning's poem, Any Wife to Any Husband. And for all this one little are to thank. All little thank are stressed, and before them the 2 syllables, and for all, and for a relative unstressed, this one little, this one unstressed, are to thank. So we have an Anapest, unstressed, unstressed, stressed. So there is a pattern, and the pattern generates a rhythm. Then we have dactyl, stressed, unstressed, unstressed. Gleamed on the columns of cypress and cedar, sustaining the branches. Gleamed on the stress is on gleamed. Gleamed on the is unstressed. Columns of, co is unstressed, lums is not, columns of is not. Cypress and, cy is stressed, press is not, and is not. Cedar, sustain, cedar, sus, cedar. Se has stress, and der and sus doesn't have, sus of sustaining. And in the remaining one, sustaining the te has the stress, ing doesn't have, the doesn't have. And branches, we have the bra has the stress and the chis doesn't have. That's not, of course, a dactyl, but the first 3 are dactyls. Gleamed on the columns of cypress and cedar, sustaining the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of them are dactyls. So there are rhythms. If you want a slow rhythm, sleepy rhythm, you use Anapest. If you want a rhythm where there's more tragic thing going on, people use trochaic more. The normal one that poets have generally used is iambic. So there are falling rhythms and rising rhythms. Rising rhythms are iamb and Anapest. Falling rhythms are trochee and dactyl. So in all these, we have seen the pattern of stresses. Now another crucial factor is number of accented feet, as I told you. Some have 5, some have 4, some have 3. Dependent upon the number of feet, we name the kind of meter it is. The line can consist of 1 foot, 2 feet, 3, 4, 5, theoretically. But generally, we do not find all these kind of feet. Instances of single foot and 4-line foot are very uncommon. A 2-foot line, we find it's called diameter. 3 foot, 3 is trimeter. 4 foot, if we get, is a tetrameter. And 5 is pentameter. Pentameter is 5 feet. So is it iambic pentameter? Is it trochaic pentameter? What kind of pentameter is it? So one, we have the meter, the foot pattern, and the other is the number of feet. So the number of feet and the pattern define the meter. And meter determines what kind of rhythm is fast rhythm, slow rhythm. It determines the rhythm. So to study rhythm, we must know the metric, the meter. To know the meter, we must know the feet, and we must know the number of repetitions of the feet, and so on. I give you an example of diameter. One more unfortunate. One more on. This is one stressed, more on unstressed. Fortunate. 4 is stressed, 2 and net is not. So it's 2 meters. We have a dactyl and a dactyl. So it's a diameter. Then I'm monarch of all I survey. I am monarch. I am mon. Unstressed, stressed. Arc of all. Unstressed, stressed. We have anapest, but only 2. That would be trimeter. And tetrameter, but hail, thou goddess sage and holy. But hail, 1 meter, yam, thou god, yam, des sage, another, and unstressed and holy. Sometimes we have a syllable which we have to leave out. But there are 1, 2, and 3. But hail, thou goddess sage. But hail, thou goddess sage and holy. Tetrameter. Pentameter, the ploughman homeward plods his weary way. The ploughman homeward plods his weary way. The plough, yam. Man, home, another yam. Word, plods, another yam. His weir, another plod. Another foot, yam. Airy, way, another yam. So 5 yams, it's a pentameter, and it's iambic pentameter. Thomas Gray, Elegy Written on Country Churchyard. Sometimes the last syllable is missed. It is compressed to form to be recited according to the rhythm of the poem. Sometimes there is a silent stress. So anyway, I hope you have understood this basic pattern. Number of feet in a line and the metrical pattern define the meter. Then we have another one which is called prosrhythm, which is very often found in contemporary poetry. Here within traditional poetry, the grammatical structure in the line is complete and the grammatical structure is marshaled according to metrical patterns. But in contemporary poetry, this is missing. The grammar overflows the lines. The grammar does not restrict itself to line and it goes out to the other line. The syntax has its own rhythm. Phonology has its own rhythm. They don't coalesce. They don't meet at the same point. Phonology is completed, grammar continues. So this is called a run-on line. Run-on line. So when we have run-on lines, then we have a different problem. We have a tension now between the metrical rhythm and the grammatical rhythm. Earlier the tension was resolved in the traditional Peter. Both of them coincided at the same point. But when it is missing, then the relationship between the two is one of tension. While metrical stress and normal word stress do coincide to a great degree, the binding of word and the syntax and the rhythm, metrical rhythm, it's missing in most contemporary poetry. They generate another kind of rhythm. This complete command of meter over grammar is missing. When this is missing, we have unconventional contemporary poetry, where stress patterns of ordinary language dominate, and the contemporary poetry is free from the stranglehold of traditional poetry. It's more like prose. The rhythms are more, they appear like prose because grammar has its own rhythm and metrical patterns have their own rhythm. They don't coincide. So we cannot sing them up in the same way. So a term has been given prosaic strength by Donald Davy, prosaic strength. And Geoffrey Leach also used it in his introduction to linguistics of poetry. He highlights the ascendance of elements of prose in poetry, how elements of prose are more dominant in some poems, in contemporary poems, and where the sentence variety is much more. Metrical patterns are almost, to the maximum extent, they're made meaningless. Sometimes they're made meaningless, sometimes they're there, but syntax is not governed by metrical patterns. So that leads to a generation of rhythm which is more syntactic in a manner, because we cannot stop at line end. The meter stops at line end, grammar doesn't. We have to follow the grammar and read into the second line also. So there is a run on line and the meter is destroyed. So it gives more like a prose-like quality to the rhythmic structure. Also generated by, this is called a counterpoint. Counterpoints are generated. Counterpoint is what? Line end and sentence end do not meet. Line end is metrical, it meets, but syntax doesn't. So this is also called a counterpoint. So when we have counterpoints, then it leads to prose rhythm. Another word that people have used is enjambment. Enjambment is run on lines. I'll give you an example, but let me first give you a very small example. Sometimes enjambment or break of a line occurs even at the morpheme level. For example, in the first line, the line ends with the hay, and the second line begins with fields. The word is hayfields. So we can't say the hay and then fields. We have to say the hayfields. So our recitation is not restricted by line end. Similarly, another example, the kingdom. In Hopkins' poem, Kingdom. The king is at the end of the line 1 and dumb begins the second line. So kingdom is a word, one word, but broken into two. We can't, when we recite the poem, we can't say the king and then we stop and then say dumb. We can't do that. We have to say the kingdom. So the rhythm, metrical rhythm is broken. And so syntax has its rhythm, and that gives us more a prose-like rhythm. But sometimes there is regularity, but regularity may not be metrical. The regularity may be morphological. Here is an example very famous example from T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. The opening lines, April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of red land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Winter kept us warm, covering earth in forgetful snow, feeding a little life with dry tubers. Now, what do you find in this line? If you look at the line in the written text, the line is April is the cruelest month, comma, breeding. Line is finished. Second line is lilacs out of dead land. If we look at the grammar, April is the cruelest month is one expression. Breeding lilacs out of dead land is another expression. So while the poet has ended the line with breeding, but lilacs come in the second line, we cannot stop at breeding. We have to read breeding lilacs out of dead land. So the meter is broken. It gives more prose-like sense. So similar thing we find in the other lines also. One line is, and it begins with mixing. And in the third line we have memory and desire. The grammatical expression is mixing memory and desire. The line is ended with mixing, memory and desire come in the other one. We can't say mixing and then memory and desire separately. We have to speak mixing memory and desire. The meter is broken. Similarly, stirring, end of the line, but we cannot stop there. Stirring dull roots with spring rain. We have to go to the next line. Here with full stop, the syntax and meter comes, they unite. But again, the same pattern begins in the next 3 lines. Winter kept us warm, covering. The covering is part of covering earth in forgetful snow. So we cannot stop at covering, we have to move on. It's a run-on line, enjambment. So such features create prosrhythm. Such features create prosrhythm, and we have stanzas in poetry, but we do not call them stanzas here. We'll talk about stanza in a while. Here, the unit of a poem which is written in a prose format is called verse paragraph. So such poems are verse paragraphs. Let's look at rhyme scheme and stanza forms in brief. What's a rhyme? Rhymes have been one of the constituent factors of poetry. It results when the vowel and the succeeding sounds, that is, nucleus and the coda, between 2 words. For example, if the nucleus and coda are repeated, we have a rhyme. For example, must, rust. In must, the onset is ba, a is the nucleus, and st is the coda. So what is being repeated is ust, not must, but ust. The onset is not repeated. Must, rust, ust. This is rhyme. So rhyme is nucleus and coda. So when we have this rhyme is created across lines, when these rhymes are across lines at regular intervals, we call it this unit a stanza. And the stanza has a rhyme scheme. Let's look at one of the rhymes. Rhyme is a constitutive factor of poetry. And how does it happen? Let's take an example. So rhymes between 2 lines and rhymes across many lines constitute a stanza. And the rhyme at the end of the line, each line of the stanza will give us the rhyme scheme. How? Another distinction, rhymes can be at the end of the lines, rhymes can be inside the lines. If there is a rhyme inside, it's an internal rhyme, otherwise external rhyme. And the rhyme scheme is as per the external rhyme. For example, the ship was cheered, the harbor cleared. Cheer, clear, cheered, cleared, eared. This is a rhythm which is inside the line. It's an internal rhythm. External rhythm should be at the end of line. So here is an example of rhyme at the end. I dare not ask a kiss, I dare not beg a smile, lest having that or this, I might grow proud that while. Smile while, kiss this. First line rhymes with the third line, second line rhymes with fourth line. Now how do we give this rhyme scheme? Each rhyme is given a small letter. Small letter A for the first rhyme, B for the second rhyme, C for the third, D for the fourth, if there are many number of lines. So for example, kiss, we give it this sound is, we give a symbol A. It has a rhyme A. Arbitrary, A. Second one is smile. So the rhyme is I'll. So I'll is different from is, it becomes B. The third one is this. This is like is of kiss. So this becomes A. And then we have while, which is like smile, this becomes B. So the rhyme scheme of this 4-line stanza is A, B, A, B. And a 4-line stanza, the rhyme scheme here is A, B, A, B. Then the rhyme scheme, the patterns of this rhyme scheme, it is indicated. I give you another example for the rhyme scheme. You can try it out. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's leaves have all too short a date. What are the last syllables? Day, rate, May, date. So after day and May, A is one rhyme. So first line ends with day, rhyme scheme is A. The third one is May, that is A, it's also A. Second one is temperate, 8, and date, line 2 and line 4, BB. So AB is also the rhyme scheme here. And number of lines are 4. The stanza is a 4-line stanza called quatrain. So different number of lines that constitute a stanza have different names. A 4-line stanza that we just saw is called a quatrain. A 2-line configuration is called a couplet. A 3-line configuration is called a tercet. 4-line quatrain, 5 lines cinquain, 6 lines sestet, 7 lines rhyme royal, 8 lines octave, and 9 lines Spenserian stanza. So different configurations have different stanzas, and all of them have specific patterns of rhymes. These are traditional patterns. So you can study them, you can study the syllables, the stress patterns, and identify what is the metrical pattern and what is the sing-song quality, how it can be sung. So this is how rhythm is generated. It is generated through meter in a line, across lines, in a unit called stanza. And stanzas can be repeated. This is about rhythm. Now we come down to onomatopoeia, alliteration, assonance, and consonance. Onomatopoeia, alliteration, assonance, and consonance, these are units of sounds organized within the line. Onomatopoeia refers to where the sound of words convey the meaning. For example, splash, bang. Splash is the word, it also conveys the meaning. Bang is a word, also conveys the meaning of a blast. So one can use onomatopoeic words and have its effect. I give you an example. Clashed on the sounding shields, the din of war. Clashed on the sounding shields. Clash is an onomatopoeic word. When clash is taken in consonant with sounding shields, the sound of the sh sound is made dominant. So there's a kind of a sound symbolism taking place, which gives the sound emanating from a war, for a fight, fighting with swords and shields. This is onomatopoeia. Alliteration is repeating the initial syllable, initial consonant of a stress syllable in a line. Initial consonant of a stress syllable in a line. So once this is repeated across words, one consonant repeated across words in the line and at similar positions before the stress, we call it alliteration. Here's an example. I caught this morning's binion, kingdom of daylight, dauphin, dapple, drawn, falcon. Let's take kingdom of daylight, dauphin, dapple, daylight, dauphin, dapple. All syllables are stressed, and the d is the, let's say, the onset. So when these onsets are repeated before the stress patterns in the same line or even the next line, this is alliteration. This alliteration leads to musical quality or emphasis. Similarly, there is assonance, where the stressed nucleus is repeated. Here's an example. Dear babe that sleepest cradled by my side, whose gentle breathings hears in this deep calm. Sleep, breathe, deep, all are stressed, and E, the long vowel, is repeated. So this is assonance. Again, this is for emphasis or musicality. Similarly, consonance is also for musicality. The repetition of consonants at varying positions in the line. Here, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. Murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. The nasal sounds produce the humming sound of the bees. So the nasal is not a nasal, but it's a sound symbolism for the sound of the bees. So such is the situation where sounds become symbols and give a significance which is more than the sounds. So in this module, we have looked at some phonological features of style, mainly rhythm. Within the rhythm, meter, the order of stressed and non-stressed syllables, constitutes a style feature. Its larger formulation, the whole line meter, is another larger style feature. The rhyme is another style feature. The stanza form, if repeated, becomes another style feature. We have styles within styles. And then we have also prosrhythm, another style feature by breaking the patterns, and then repetition of sounds at regular intervals within the line. Assonance, alliteration, both of them. And then onomatopoeia and consonants also, all these are becoming symbols of sounds to convey something else.